This video looks at National 5 Design and Manufacture. It focuses on Section 1 of the exam paper questions, and it is made for the Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative. The learning intentions are to improve knowledge and understanding of Section 1 topics, to practice answering Section 1 questions from past papers, and to improve understanding of marking instructions and then apply this knowledge when answering future questions. The success criteria are: I can recall my experience of working with materials and tools. I can then use that knowledge to answer questions in Section 1. I can use my understanding of the marking instructions to make sure I'm providing enough detail to my answers. I can mark my own answers against a marking scheme, and I can evaluate my success and plan my next steps for revising. Throughout the lesson, you will see various symbols on the slides to indicate what you should do. The resources you will need for this lesson are lined paper or a jotter or notebook, pencil or a pen, a ruler. You may also wish to have highlighter pens or coloured pencils and sticky notes. I'm going to start by looking at Section 1. Section 1 is worth 60 marks in total, and roughly 30 marks of those will be for Question 1. Question 1 will focus on workshop manufacture and things that you'd be able to do in school with materials you would have available to you in school. Most of Question 1 should be based on your experiences of things you've made in the workshop. You will be asked about tools, processes, machinery, and health and safety. The common exam question topics that we're going to cover today are naming suitable materials for metals, plastics and woods, describing the steps to applying appropriate surface finishes for metal, plastic and wood, describing the advantages and disadvantages of different surface finishes, describing a sequence of operation for metal turning or wood turning, and explaining health and safety requirements which are specific to different workshop machinery. Let's start by focusing on materials. You need to know that there are groups of materials, and you need to know the properties of these materials and their suitability for different applications. The groups of materials you need to know are softwoods, hardwoods and manufactured boards, thermoplastics and thermosetting plastics, ferrous metals and non-ferrous metals, and whether those are alloys or pure metals. Let's look at softwoods first. You need to know red pine and spruce. You may have information about other types of softwoods, but these are the only two that SQA require you to know about. I would suggest at this point you want to pause the video, copy this table down, and complete it with the properties and common uses of each of these materials. Let's look at hardwoods now. You need to know beech, ash, mahogany, and oak. And again, these are the only ones that the SQA require you to know. I would suggest you pause the video at this point and copy this table down, adding the properties and common uses of each of these materials. Let's finally look at manufactured boards. You need to know plywood, flexiply or flexible plywood, MDF or medium density fibreboard, chipboard and hardboard. I would suggest at this point you want to pause the video, copy the table and add in the properties and common uses of each of these materials. Let's put that knowledge into practice. The National 5 Design and Manufacture has 80 marks available for its question paper. You sit these 80 marks over 1 hour and 45 minutes. This works out at 1.3 minutes per 1 mark. So this 1 mark question here should take you roughly 1 minute. This paper is the 2019 paper, and this is question 1A. In question 1A, you're asked to name a suitable light coloured hardwood for the standard peg. Pause the video now and answer the question. This is the marking instructions for question 1A part I. If you have named one of the following, beech, ash or oak, you will gain 1 mark for your correct response. If you look to the side, you will also see there are additional marking instructions. The hardwood as identified must be light in colour to gain a mark, so this means that mahogany, teak, walnut will all score 0 marks. Other suitable hardwoods are maple, sycamore or birch, which would also gain 1 mark. Balsa wood would not be a suitable answer because although it is light in colour, it is very weak and is not strong enough for the purpose shown. What is the takeaway knowledge from having answered that question? Name. Looking for one or few words, usually writing a name of something. Suitable. Suitable means the thing has to be appropriate and have appropriate properties for the use given. Colour. In this case, it's asking for it to be a light colour. So comprehension is key here. You need to make sure you are fully answering the question. And to do that, you need to make sure you're fully reading the question. I encourage all of my candidates when they see a question like this to either highlight the important words or underline them. So in this case, suitable, light coloured and hardwood are all important parts for this question. You could name a hardwood but that is not suitable or light coloured and you would not get a mark. You could also name a light coloured hardwood that's not suitable because it's too weak, i.e. balsa wood. So those 3 sets of words are really important and they are the key to unlocking the answer to this question. Let's look at another exam question. This one's from the 2019 paper and it's question 1C part I. I suggest you pause the video now and you answer this question and it should roughly take you 2.5 minutes. You're being asked to state 2 reasons why MDF is a suitable choice of material for the backboard. Let's look at the marking instructions. A statement that includes 2 of the following things. Cheaper than solid timber, easy to work with or drill, available in wide boards, does not warp or twist like a natural wood would, smooth surface for good quality finish, because it tells you earlier that it would need to be painted, suitable strength for the backboard, easy to source or is readily available, thin sheets of MDF are lightweight and easy to manoeuvre, made from recycled materials or is sustainable, MDF has a suitable durability, or any other suitable response. Let's look at some more answers. Getting 0 marks is cheap or easy on its own. Cheap when compared to something else would be a mark, and easy to work with would be a mark. Easy to use is too vague and would not get a mark. Easy to work with would be a suitable answer. It is smooth is a suitable answer because you're told in the question that the item needs to be painted. It is strong. We're being told that pegs need to fit into this, so that would be a prerequisite for the material. It's available in large sheets, much larger than you would be able to get a material such as pine or mahogany. It will look good when it's painted because it's smooth. Doesn't warp like real woods. Easier to drill than wood with knots. And it costs less than pine, or it's cheaper than pine would be a suitable answer. Mark your work now. Grey paint was applied to the surface of the backboard, and in this question you've been asked to describe 3 ways to ensure a high quality paint finish. If you pause the video now and answer this question, it should take you about 4 minutes. This question is taken from the 2019 paper, question 1C, part I. Here are the marking instructions for that question. Pause the video now and mark your answer. To get 3 full marks, you need to have said 3 of the following things. Sanding or abrading the surfaces, also known as keying the surface, allows the paint to stick better to the wood. You can also seal the MDF or use PVA or a primer paint. Apply thin layers of paint stops an unwanted texture. If you get an unwanted texture, you can rub down with sandpaper in between coats. You need to make sure you're removing dust before you start painting and in between coats. Making sure there's not too much paint on the brush also helps avoid an unwanted texture. Waiting for the paint to dry between coats is an essential step. If you apply a second coat of paint before the first coat of paint is fully dry, it will lift the first coat of paint and leave behind an unwanted texture. Brushing in one direction also makes sure that all the marks from the brush are going in the same way. Remove any drips or runs or any bristles, fibres or speck because after the paint is dried, these will be permanently stuck to the surface. If using spray paint, make sure you're spraying at the correct distance. This will be on the can. Try to work in as dust-free an environment as humanly possible. Applying a protective or aesthetic top coat such as a varnish or lacquer. Ensure an even coverage. Some people prefer to use a roller or sponge because you often get a better finish than you would do with a brush. In this case, rubbing out pencil marks scores 0 marks. Let's look at an example answer. Use a brush to cover the board with a thin layer of paint. Leave to dry and lightly sand it before applying another layer. This answer gets 3 marks. The first mark for saying there's a thin layer of paint, the second for saying it needs to dry between coats, and the third mark comes from sanding in between coats. Let's move on to looking at metals. Non-ferrous metals or alloys that you need to know for National 5 are aluminium, copper and brass. I would suggest that you pause the video now, copy the table and add in the properties and common uses of each material. These are the ferrous metals and alloys that you need to know: cast iron, iron, mild steel, hard carbon steel and stainless steel. I would suggest that you pause the video now, copy the table and add in the properties and common uses of each material. Other than questions asking you to pick suitable materials and questions about suitable finishes, i.e. how to apply them and which ones are suitable, most questions about metals focus on the processes: measuring, marking out, drilling, cutting, shaping and turning. Let's put our knowledge of processes into practice. This question is from the 2019 paper and it's question 1E, part II. The phone shelf corners were marked out on a sheet of copper as shown below. You're being asked to describe how to mark out the corners, making reference to workshop tools, and you may use sketches to illustrate your answer. So this question is asking you to write a short sequence of operation for marking out the rounded corners. You should make reference to specific metal working tools. The order needs to be logical, and you're only being asked how to mark out, not how to cut the corners. This task should take about 4 minutes. You pause the video now and write down your answer. This is an example answer to the question. I'd like you to have a think whilst I'm reading about how many marks out of 3 you would give this candidate. Step 1. Set a pair of odd-like calipers to the required size from the edge of the metal to the centre of the circle. You will need a steel rule to measure the size between the legs of the calipers. Step 2. Mark the metal with the odd-like calipers a small length along both edges of the corner. Step 3. Centre punch where the 2 lines meet to help mark the circle. Step 4. Set spring dividers to the correct size with a steel rule, then mark a quarter circle in the corner. How many marks out of 3 would you give this answer? Remember, 1 mark equals 1 statement. This candidate has got more than 3 marks, so we would only be able to get a maximum of 3 marks. But is it easy to read and is it easy to follow? Let's look at another example to compare it to. By adding drawings and diagrams, this sequence of operations is much easier to follow, and it is also very clear what the candidate means. I'll give you a hint here. The words are exactly the same, but the addition of the pictures does make it much clearer and much easier to mark. These are the marking instructions for this question. I'd like you to pause the video now and correct your answer from earlier. As you can see, there are more than one correct answer and one correct method for marking out the corners. You could use odd-like calipers, as was shown in the example before, or you could use an engineer square and a scriber and achieve the same end results. Pay close attention to the last bullet point there. You have to mark the arcs with dividers. Anything that says a compass requires 0 marks. A compass is an incorrect tool, a compass is a drawing tool, and a pencil mark would not be seen on metal. Let's move on to look at metal turning. I'd like to pause the video in a moment and identify each of the processes that I've labelled 1 to 5. As a bonus question, there are also 2 processes that you need to know at National 5 level, which are not shown here. What are they? This should roughly take you about 7 minutes because it will be worth 7 marks in the exam. Time to mark your answers. Number 1 is chamfering. Chamfering is a less aggressive form of number 2, taper turning. Taper turning is when you cut at a different angle from the tool bed. It's used to make a sloped surface like this. It doesn't always have to come to a point. Number 3 is drilling. You can use a standard twist drill parallel to the bed on a previously faced surface. This could be prepared with a slow comb drill, which is also sometimes known as a centre drill. Number 4, parallel turning. This is when you cut along the length of the job parallel to the lathe bed. This will make the metal thinner. And number 5 is knurling. This is when you cut a rough surface onto the job. The knurling tool has 2 cutting wheels. You turn the machine to a very slow speed and you move the cutting tool parallel to the bed. If you're using an automatic feed, you must also have this to a very slow speed. Time to look at the bonus questions 6 and 7. Facing off is when we cut across the job at right angles to the bed of the lathe. This will remove any saw marks. This is often the first process that many people do on a centre lathe. This will also polish the surface. The final bonus mark is parting off. This is when you cut a completed job from a larger piece of metal. This must be done at a much slower machine speed. You slowly reduce the thickness of the metal till almost nothing remains. Then the 2 pieces of metal will part ways and be separated. Let's take the time now to look at another example of an exam question. This question is from the 2018 paper and it is question 1E, part I. The bolt and weight were created on a centre lathe, and you're being asked to name the processes that would be carried out on the centre lathe to create the features at A, B and C. As a 3-mark question, this should take you no more than 4 minutes. Pause the video now and answer the question. Before we go on to mark that question, let's look at the next part. Having created features A and B, adjustments were made to the centre lathe to create feature C. State 2 adjustments that would need to be made to the centre lathe to create the textured feature on part C. As a 2-mark question, this should take you no more than 2 minutes. This question is from the 2018 paper and it's question 1E, part II. Let's mark those 2 questions together now. Feature A is taper turning or chamfering. In this instance, I would err towards the side of taper turning because more material has been removed. Feature B shows parallel turning and feature C shows knurling. The second part of that question, 2 things you'd have to do would be you need to change the tool and you need to reduce the speed because knurling needs to be done on a slow speed. You may also have to make sure the compound slide is at 90 degrees to the work depending on the process that you did prior to doing this. It is common to be asked about health and safety when working with machines in your exam paper. This question is asking you to state 3 safety checks that must be carried out to the centre lathe before use. This is a 3-mark question and should take you no more than 4 minutes. Pause the video now and answer the question. Let's mark your answers now. You must make sure the guard is down. Most workshops and schools have a guard on a microcontroller. This ensures that the machine can never be switched on unless the guard is activated. You must make sure the chuck key has been removed from the chuck. If you don't do this, when you turn the machine on, the chuck key will fly out and cause an injury. You must make sure the material is tight in the chuck. You must make sure the correct chuck is being used for the metal cross-section. For example, if you are using a square cross-section of metal, you would need to use a chuck that has 4 jaws instead of 3. You need to make sure the tools are tightly secured. You also should make sure that the tools are sharp. You should have lubrication available if required for the material and the process. And you should also ensure that the lathe is going to spin at the correct speed for the metal and process. Some metals are softer and easier to cut than others and require a faster or slower speed. And as we talked before about knurling, knurling requires a much slower speed in order to be effective. When answering questions about health and safety, keep the following two things in mind. Answers about the user are not rewarded with marks, so don't talk about goggles, don't talk about wearing aprons, don't talk about tying hair up. Answers must be specific to that piece of machinery. If that piece of machinery doesn't have a guard, then you can't say, make sure you use the guard. You may also be asked about the health and safety when using other pieces of equipment in the workshop, such as the pillar drill, the mortise machine, the wood lathe, an oven or a strip heater. It's now time to look at plastics. The thermoplastics that you need to know for National 5 are ABS, acrylic, polypropylene and polystyrene. I would suggest that you pause the video now, copy the table and complete the properties and common uses of each material. These are the thermosetting plastics you need to know for National 5. Urea formaldehyde and melamine formaldehyde. Pause the video now and copy the table, adding the properties and common uses of each material. Let's put your plastics knowledge into practice. This is taken from the 2019 paper, and this is question 1D. A photo holder was made from thermoplastic sheet. The thermoplastic sheet was marked out and folded to securely hold a photo. Describe how the photo holder would have been folded into shape with reference to workshop tools and equipment. This question is worth 2 marks and should take you no longer than 2 minutes. Pause the video now and answer the question. Let's look at the marking instructions for that question. Marking instructions are split into 3 sections: the heating stage, the folding stage, and the setting stage. In the heating stage, you can say that you either have to heat it or soften it with a strip heater or a line bender. The next thing you would do is fold it into the required shape or bend it around a former. A former can be anything, including just scrap materials. You could also at this point say you have to fold it and bend it into shape and clamp it into something like a vise. Setting stage is to leave it to cool in the vise, or to leave it under a heavy weight or object, or just hold it in place until it sets. This question demonstrates your understanding of how to use the machinery, but also your understanding of how thermoplastics work. You need to heat them, you need to shape them, and then you need to let them cool in order to harden back up again. It is also important that you know how to finish the edges of plastic. The 4 stages of finishing plastic are: Step 1, to cross-file. Cross-filing is when we use the file at 90 degrees to the edge. This removes more material than Step 2, draw filing. Draw filing is when we use the file at a slight angle or parallel to the edge of the plastic. Step 3 is to use wet and dry paper, and we use this wet, and this helps smooth out even further. In preparation for Step 4, which is to use polish. I use the phrase "can dance with pride" to help me remember the order in which these come in. If you don't already know this information, pause the video now and copy it into your notebook. And why not see if you can come up with your own phrase? We have just finished looking at where the 30 marks for question 1 come from. We're now going to look at where the other 30 marks for section 1 can come from. Section 1, in questions 2 onwards, will focus on your knowledge of design factors and the design process in general. The first design factor that you should know about is function. At National 5 level, you are expected to be able to discuss the influence of function on the design of a range of products. You should also be able to tell us the difference between a primary and a secondary function. It should go without saying that products have to work. but that's only part of the picture. The second and arguably more important design factor that you need to know about is performance. Products have to work well. At National 5 level, you're expected to understand the influence of performance on the design of products. You should be able to discuss maintenance issues. Side note, issues in design and manufacture does not mean a problem. Issues in this case purely means an important factor to consider. So a maintenance issue is not a problem with the maintenance of the product, but just something that's important that you have to think about. The influence of a product's life expectancy on design, manufacture and the environment. You need to think about the fitness for purpose. Not all products are designed to be used in every situation and scenario. For example, a tin opener that was designed to be used for camping would be no good in hospitality sector in a large kitchen. Another area of performance you need to be able to discuss are safety issues. Again, issues does not mean problems, just things related to safety that are important to consider. All of these things need to come together to make that product work well, to function well, to have good performance. The next design factor that you need to know about is market, and you should be able to discuss the influence of the target market on the design of products. You should be able to identify different types of target market. Marketing techniques can be used to influence sales, and you should be familiar with some of these. You should be able to discuss the benefits and drawbacks of branding and describe technology push and market pull. Technology push is when technology is advancing and pushing a design of an item forward. And market pull is when the market, the target market, are pulling a company to do a certain thing that they want a product to have or do. The importance of market can be summed up as products have to sell. The next design factor that you need to know about is aesthetics. At National 5 level, you're expected to be able to discuss the influence of aesthetics on products. Aesthetic keywords are contrast, line, texture, shape, form, colour, proportion, symmetry or asymmetry, materials, fashion and pattern. Aesthetics can be summed up as products have to be appealing. Aesthetics questions at National 5 and higher don't tend to be well done because people often give their opinions of what the product looked like rather than simply stating one of the key words in relation to the product. I would suggest at this point you may want to pause the video and copy down the key words. You may also wish, if you don't already know these, to go and find a definition of each of these words. The final design factor that you need to know is ergonomics. Ergonomics is the study of the human body, its limitations and strengths. At National 5 level, you are expected to be able to discuss the influence of ergonomics on the design of products. This should be in terms of safety, comfort and the ease of use for the user. You are also expected to be able to use anthropometric data tables. Ergonomics can be summed up as products have to be made for people. This means that people have to be considered at every stage so that they can safely, comfortably and easily use the product. Let's start by looking at a question on ergonomics, which is often the most tricky of questions. This question is taken from the 2019 paper and it is question 5A. An iron and an ironing board are shown below. You've been asked to describe how ergonomics may have influenced design of the iron and/or the ironing board, and the question is worth 4 marks. This should take you no longer than 5 minutes to complete. Pause the video now and write your answers. Before we move on to look at the marking instructions, here is an example of a candidate answer from the Understanding Standards website. I want you to read through the answer on the right-hand side of the screen and decide how many marks out of 4 you would have given this candidate. You may wish to pause the video now and read this. This candidate was awarded 4 marks out of 4. The first mark for saying that the circumference of the iron handle has to be held by small hands. The circumference of the iron handle is a specific part of the iron, and this is very good practice for when going up to higher. The handle to adjust the height must be able to be used by weaker hands is the second mark. The fact that the ironing board is adjustable in height is the third mark. And the buttons on the iron need to be easy to press is the fourth mark. Here are the marking instructions for the ergonomics question. Let's mark your answer. Ergonomics at higher is split into 3 sections: anthropometrics, which you need to know at National 5, and 2 which are higher specific: physiology and psychology. The marking instructions here are still split into those 3 sections. And whilst you do not need to know the other 2, you may make comments which are related to those areas of study. Let's look at anthropometrics first. Any one part of the iron or ironing board, and then linking that with one piece of appropriate information or a part of a body. This could be such things as adjustable ironing board height or the waist to elbow height, the ratio between the length of the table and the length of the arm or reach, the distance between ironing board feet and the breadth of the human feet, the shape or size of the tabletop in relation to the size of the clothing, the diameter of the handle versus the diameter of an average person's grip, the handle length versus the palm width of an average person's hand, the button location versus the thumb length of an average person's thumb. You'll see in these questions that there's a part of the item and then a relation to part of the human body. This is not strictly necessary at National 5, but is very good practice because it is essential at higher level. Let's look at the other 2 areas of ergonomics now. Physiology is the study of the human body's strengths and limitations. In terms of this question, that means the strength required to do various tasks with the iron and the ironing board, including how hard you need to press the button, how comfortable the handle is, and how easy it is to fill. Psychology is the study of the brain, and in product design we think about how the senses pick up information and feedback things to our brain. This includes the colours of parts, which provide visual feedback to the brain to tell us what to do with items. The iron may also make a sound when it's at the correct temperature, and the controls need to be easy to understand and visual. Let's take a look at another example answer from the Understanding Standards website. In a moment, I want you to pause this video, read through the candidate's answer and decide how many marks out of 4 you would give this candidate. This candidate scored 3 marks out of 4. The first mark came from saying that the height of the ironing board had to suit most of its clients. The second mark from saying the type of material that the iron's handle was made of had to be comfortable to hold. And the third mark from saying that the pressure needed to operate the buttons. The last statement there gets no marks. The size of the cap to fill the iron with the water would be influenced by ergonomics so that it's easy to fill with water. This is an example of an answer which on the surface looks correct but is not. Let's talk about the process involved here in deciding whether that got a mark or not. As a marker, you have to ask yourself these 3 questions. Is it true? Is it relevant? And does it answer the question? The spout on an iron is not influenced by ergonomics. It is influenced by the function and performance of the item. That answer is not true. Let's look at how other design factors have influenced products. This question is again taken from the 2019 paper and it's question 5B and 5C. 5B asks you to describe how function may have influenced the design of the iron and/or the ironing board, And 5C is asking you to describe how safety has influenced the design of the iron or the ironing board. Each of these questions is marked with 2 marks each, so it shouldn't take you any more than 5 minutes to do this question. Suggest you pause the video now and write up your answer. Let's look at the marking instructions for 5B now. You need to have made 2 of the following points. The ironing board needs to be correct size to fit clothes. The rack underneath has to hold clothes. The rack to the side needs to hold an iron. The cover needs to be heat resistant. The legs are foldable for storage. The top is adjustable in height. The iron has adjustable heat for different types of materials in different situations. The iron has a water container. The iron can produce steam, as many irons don't. The button on the top sprays water or steam for extra water or steam. The iron has a long cable to reach either end of the board. Smooth heat plate so the iron glides and doesn't get stuck on material or damage materials. And there's holes in the iron plate to let the steam through. All of these answers are things that are required of the iron or the ironing board in order to do its job. Let's look at part C now. You were asked to describe how safety has influenced the design of those products. The heat plate is a different colour to stand out from the rest of the iron. This gives you a visual clue not to touch that part, but also gives you a visual clue on which part to use on top of the material. The stability is provided by having a wide base at the bottom. Stability and not toppling over are a safety concern. Insulation has been provided by plastic on the iron and round the cable. The distance from the sole plate to the handle. There is enough distance there that the heat cannot rise up and hurt a person's hand when they're using the iron. The strength required to do various tasks with the moving and removal of the ironing board. The folding mechanism has to have been designed to minimise the risk to finger traps. None of the items can have any sharp edges. The iron has a red light to indicate danger when the iron is on. This also tells you when the iron is heating up and not to use it at that point. There are also some hygiene issues. The iron needs to have a smooth surface to make it easy to clean. And the ironing board needs to have a removable cover which is easy to clean. All of these have influenced the safety of these products. If any of these were not being met, the products would not be safe to use. These are safety issues. Let's turn our attention now to aesthetics. Aesthetics at higher and National 5 level are some of the worst answered questions because people forget to use their keywords. I've added a box at the bottom with the keywords you may wish to use when answering these questions to help you get into the practice of it. This question is from the 2019 paper and it's question 6A. It is worth 3 marks and should take you about 4 minutes to answer. A portable speaker is shown and you're asked to describe 3 aesthetic aspects of the speaker. You are not being asked to give your opinion on whether it looks good, looks nice, looks cool. You should use the keywords in the keywords box to answer this. I suggest that you pause the video now and write your answer. Let's take a look at the marking instructions for this question. To gain 1 mark, candidates should refer to one of the broad areas and link it to a part or parts of the speaker. The speaker is blue. It has a curvy shape. The colours are eye-catching. The red colour is eye-catching. The red colour is eye-catching, which will increase sales. This gets no extra marks for the influence of aesthetics on the sales. You could have just written the red colour is eye-catching and still have gotten 1 mark. Other responses, such as saying it is unique, abstract or organic, would also score a mark. The red and blue colours contrast scores 2 marks because you're discussing the colours and then also saying that the colours are in contrast with one another. Eye-catching on its own scores 0 marks. And anything with vague responses such as it being different, nice, interesting or unusual scores 0 marks. Pause the video now and mark your answer. Let's look at 3 different candidates' answers. Candidate 1 said, blue colour is bright and eye-catching, drawing customers to look at it. Unusual shape of speakers is eye-catching as it's quirky and different to conventional speakers. Round inner shape is in harmony with round casing of speaker. Candidate 2 said, bright attractive colours. Unique shape makes it appeal to target market. Mesh grille gives a clean look, meaning you can see internal speaker. Candidate 3 said, the bright colours is an aesthetic aspect that makes the speaker look interesting. The odd shape is an aesthetic aspect of the speaker which also makes it look interesting. The smooth texture is another aesthetic aspect of the speaker. Let's now look at the marking instructions and where these candidates got given marks. Candidate 1 got 3 marks out of 3. The first mark comes from saying the blue colour is bright and eye-catching. The second from being an unusual shape of speaker. And the third mark coming from saying the round inner shape was in harmony. You'll see the bits there that are highlighted which draw no marks at all. So this candidate could have condensed what they said down to those statements and still have gotten 3 marks. Candidate 2 got 2 marks out of 3. The first mark from saying it was a bright, attractive colour, and the second mark from saying it was a unique shape. The mesh grille gives a clean look, meaning you can see internal speaker, is not an aesthetic description. Candidate 3 also got 2 marks out of 3. The first mark from saying there was a bright colours, and the second mark for saying there was a smooth texture. Again, you can see by highlighting the actual answers how much waffle is in this question. The second answer there, describing something as being an odd shape or that it looks interesting, is not good enough to get a mark for an aesthetics question at National 5. Let's look at 2 last examples of answers for this question. Candidate 4 says, if people like the shape of the design, if people find the colours appealing, if the materials look appealing on the product. Candidate 5 has said, the colours are bright and harmonising, making it appealing. The shape is also unusual, making it stand out. And the mesh pattern on the front also contrasts with the red. Let's look at the marking instructions for these candidates. Candidate 4 received 0 marks. None of the things this candidate has said are to do with aesthetics or make any points or description. Candidate 5 received 1 mark for saying the colours were bright. Where harmonising may be a term that you want to use, the colours in this speaker do not harmonise, they are in contrast with one another. They get no marks for saying that the shape is unusual or that makes it stand out. And you can't compare a pattern and a colour and then say that they contrast with one another. When you're making a comparison for contrast, it needs to be like for like. So it needs to be 2 textures being compared with one another, 2 patterns, 2 colours, etc. Let's review our initial learning intentions. We were aiming to improve the knowledge and understanding of Section 1 topics. We wanted to practice answering Section 1 questions from past papers, and to improve our understanding of marking instructions, and to be able to apply this knowledge when answering future questions. The success criteria for this lesson were: they can recall my experience of working with materials and tools. I can use that knowledge to answer questions in Section 1. I can use my understanding of the marking instructions to make sure I'm providing enough detail to my answers. I can mark my own answers against a marking scheme, and I can evaluate my success and plan for my next steps in revising. Next steps. You have now covered almost all of the most common content in Section 1. Section 1 is worth 60 out of a total of 80 marks available for the question paper at National 5 level. Section 1 covers workshop-based manufacture and design. Section 2 focuses on commercial manufacturing.